Love Canal was an environmental disaster that occurred during the 1970s and 80s in the United States, after an elementary school and a neighborhood were built on top of a toxic waste dump. It's a story primarily about negligence and a period of history with few guidelines or laws surrounding environmental protection. It sparked the beginning of a new environmental movement, started by families at the neighborhood level, and ultimately it led to the creation of a federal program called Superfund, which steps in to investigate and remediate similar dangerous locations across the country. In the late 19th century, a businessman named William Love acquired the area near Niagara Falls because of its potential for transportation and hydroelectric power. He started digging a canal which would connect the upper and lower Niagara River and would contain a 300-foot drop at the end, and that's what would produce enough power for a new industrial and economic hub. But before his plan could be completed, an economic depression caused the project to lose funding, and at the same time, Nikola Tesla's breakthrough discoveries with alternating current made it unnecessary for industry to be located so close to sources of power. So Love was forced to abandon the project, and the location sat unused as an open ditch for decades. In 1942, Hooker Chemicals and Plastics Corporation purchased the incomplete canal. The company manufactured chlorine as well as materials used by the U.S. military during World War II. Over a period of about 20 years, they disposed of dyes, solvents, and other chemical byproducts by the barrel into the canal. In total, Hooker Chemical dumped over 20,000 tons of toxic materials, including 80 different chemical compounds. Benzene, a well-known carcinogen, toluene, which can cause anemia and a reduction in white blood cells, dioxin, which is another carcinogen and can affect the liver and central nervous system, TCE, which also affects the central nervous system and can cause cardiac arrest, and chloroform. The barrels were either buried or left exposed in the canal, and over time they corroded, broke down, and leaked into the soil. In the early 50s, the dumping ceased and the area was covered with soil. Soon after, the Niagara Falls School Board approached Hooker Chemical about purchasing the property because they liked the location for a new school. Hooker warned the school board about the history of Love Canal and said that nothing should be built there. They provided soil analysis from 8 locations on the site and demonstrated that it was full of dangerous chemicals. But the board chose to proceed with the purchase nonetheless and bought Love Canal for $1. To protect themselves, Hooker Chemical states in the deed that the location was used as a dump and reiterated that construction should not proceed on the site, and the company cannot be held liable for any harm resulting from use of the property after its sale. In the 50s, an elementary school was built on 99th Street, where over 400 students attended. Later, the school board sold the remainder of the land to a developer. They added their name to the existing warning in the deed to now protect themselves from liability, sold it, and opened up Love Canal for development of homes. About 800 were built. After a period of heavy rain in the 1970s, families in the neighborhood started complaining about a chemical smell. Then waste began swelling up into backyards and seeping into basements. The barrels that were once buried were exposed by soil runoff, and kids were getting burns and rashes from playing outside and at the school. Over the years, the neighborhood had also seen suspiciously high rates of birth defects, miscarriages, and cancer. Looking for help, the residents formed 2 organizations, the Concerned Love Canal Renters Association and the Love Canal Homeowners Association, which is the more well-known of the 2. Lois Gibbs had a son attending the 99th Street School, and she was the head of the Homeowners Association. In an attempt to raise awareness, the association started circulating a petition demanding that the school be closed until it was safe. In 1978, the state of New York decided to send health officials to do soil tests around the neighborhood. Not surprisingly, they found an alarming number of dangerous chemicals, and found through surveying current and former residents that 23% of their pregnancies had resulted in miscarriage, which is 1.5 times higher than average. Also, 13% of babies born in Love Canal had birth defects. In the summer, after these findings were shared with the state, New York declared a state of emergency, and 99th Street School was closed. Purchase negotiations were started with residents within the first 2 rows of homes so they could evacuate. All pregnant women and children under 2 were moved. Around 200 families moved in total. But there were 800 families in Love Canal, meaning 600 others were left, concerned for their safety. Since the 99th Street School was closed, children were bused elsewhere, and families were left wondering how it was safe for them to live in the area, but not their children to go to school a couple streets over. In addition, the initial remediation of the site only included fencing the area, capping the landfill with clay, and installing drainage trenches built into the backyards of existing homes, where families were meant to continue living. The neighborhood continued its call for action, the evacuation of all Love Canal residents. There were protests which gained national attention, and even effigies of Jimmy Carter were burned. In 1980, in response to the protests, officials from the EPA arrived at Love Canal and met with Lois Gibbs and the Homeowners Association at their office, which was in an abandoned house in the neighborhood. The EPA told the association their demands couldn't be met, and after hearing that, the association decided they were done asking nicely. Hundreds of neighbors surrounded the association office, preventing the EPA representatives from leaving. Lois gave them an ultimatum. Either the White House moved the remaining families out, or the association would up the ante. After 5 hours, President Carter declared a federal state of emergency, and the rest of Love Canal was able to relocate. The federal and state government would work together to purchase the homes and pay for any further remediation. In the same year, Carter announced the creation of CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980, also known as Superfund. This program would set aside resources to the EPA for any future environmental disaster. After the remaining families were relocated, additional remediation efforts were started. The remaining homes and 99th Street School were torn down. The existing clay cap over the landfill was covered in synthetic material to prevent rain from entering. The drainage system was improved, and a leachate treatment facility was installed. As of today, cleanup of Love Canal is considered complete, and it is continually monitored by a private company in cooperation with the EPA and State of New York. The contaminated zone is empty apart from the treatment facility, with the original dump site from 95th to 100th Street fenced off. There are currently over 1,300 Superfund sites in the United States, many of them resulting from similar circumstances. They're former dumps, mining sites, fertilizer plants. But Love Canal is interesting because it was more than a dump for chemicals. It was a display of negligence from almost every party involved. Hooker Chemical was forced to pay millions of dollars for damage to the environment and to cover the cost of remediation. Hundreds of residents also sued the company, and it caught the majority of blame in the national media. A lot of the time, the story of Love Canal is told. The school board, EPA, and State of New York don't get as much blame, but the school board knew they were buying a contaminated property and did it anyway. Then they turned around and sold pieces of it. And if not for the Homeowners Association, New York and the EPA would have left hundreds of families uncompensated and sitting dangerously close to the dump. If Love Canal didn't get the attention it did, would we have a fund for these kind of disasters at all?